The White House is one of the most recognizable buildings in the world. It's an icon of the United States' executive branch and a temporary residence of each president and their family. But while the building is typically associated with the grounded day-to-day governance of the federal government, its rich history includes many unique stories, including that of the occult and paranormal. Because as spiritualism took hold within the United States in the mid to late 1800s, two first ladies began holding seances within the walls of the White House. Though these were not performed in an act of morbid curiosity at what lay beyond the realm of the living, but out of a desperate desire to overcome the grief and loss of loved ones. This is the history of seances within the White House. And this is Learn Something New. Spiritualism in 1800s America really didn't become widely popular until 1848, when John D. Fox, his wife, and their 6 children began hearing mysterious sounds in their new home in Hydesville, New York. The knocking sounds throughout their house would begin to respond to the actions of 2 of their daughters, Margaret and Kate. Things like clapping their hands or snapping their fingers would get a response from the knocks. Before long, they had worked out a simple understanding and way of communicating with the spirit residing in their home. Not only did this instance of paranormal activity set alight a new energy in the spiritualist movement throughout the United States, but it also began to spread worldwide. Their alleged discovery of proof of life after death made the Fox sisters celebrities within just months. They would spend decades traveling around the country to promote spiritualism before ultimately revealing in 1888 that the entire story had been fabricated, though Margaret would eventually take back that admission. Despite the women coming clean, the spiritualist movement had already taken hold throughout the nation. Throughout the mid-1800s, spiritualism proliferated in communities regardless of class or gender. Seemingly, it was not disproven by the technology of the time, but rather legitimized by it, as spirit photographers setting up shop starting in the 1860s said that the new camera technology could capture imagery of the ghostly phenomena. These too would eventually be largely chalked up to overlaying negatives during the printing process so that images taken separately would appear on a single photograph, though other methods were also found to be used to fake images. Yet, for those who had an open enough mind to embrace the ideas of spiritualism as a potentially viable lens with which to view life, death, and the afterlife, subsequent claims may have appeared to them as evidence for those claims made in the past, especially since there were respected figures like Arthur Conan Doyle, the author who created the character Sherlock Holmes, who wrote of the spiritualist movement. The conclusion then of my long search after truth is that in spite of occasional fraud, which spiritualists deplore, and in spite of wild imaginings, which they discourage, there remains a great solid core in this movement, which is infinitely nearer to positive proof than any other religious development with which I am acquainted. Given the insane popularity of spiritualism, it only made sense that at the highest levels, even as far up as the White House, people were aware of the movement sweeping the Western world. Just 2 months after President Franklin Pierce was elected into the United States of America's highest office on January 6, 1853, he and his wife tragically lost their only child that had managed to survive birth at just 11 years old. The young Benny Pierce had died in a train accident where a rail car carrying the trio had overturned, and the parents took it hard, especially Jane Pierce. In her grief, she, like so many others of the time, was primed for spiritualism to take hold. The First Lady was so taken by the story of the Fox sisters and the knocking sounds and alleged ghosts that they frequently communicated with, that she invited them to DC, hosting them at the White House. Even before this point, in her grief, Jane had written letters to her deceased child asking for Benny to come see her so that she could apologize for any shortcomings as a mother she may have had. After the seance, which likely mimicked many of the ones the Fox sisters were known to perform back at their home in New York, though the exact details were kept under wraps, the First Lady seemed to have had a brief stint of relief from the depression that had earned her the nickname the Shadow in the White House. But it would sadly soon return, and she would spend the rest of her life mourning the loss of her son, passing away in 1863. 1 year prior, in 1862, yet another 11-year-old would pass away tragically, this time within the White House itself. While Abraham Lincoln was in the midst of the Civil War, the First Lady, Mary Lincoln, was helping her son through his battle with typhoid fever. but it would be a battle which he would lose. Mary Todd Lincoln was no stranger to loss at this point. When she was 6, her mother had passed, and of the 4 sons she had had with Abraham Lincoln, only one would actually make it to adulthood. But when young Willie passed, the First Lady was left to grieve alone while her husband was away. This situation was likely made worse since the public sentiment was not as understanding as you might expect. Many mothers throughout the Union felt little sympathy for the First Lady. After all, she was able to spend time with Willie in his last days, while they had lost their sons en masse in the constant bloodshed engulfing the nation. While mourning the loss of her 3rd child, Mary quickly found solace in spiritualism. She met with the Lowrys, mediums who had become popular in Washington, D.C. Cranston Lowry, along with his wife Margaret and their daughter Belle, met with the First Lady and conducted seances. These springboarded Mary Lincoln into becoming a hardcore believer. She would visit the Lowrys at their home in Georgetown and also invite them into the White House to conduct numerous seances in the Red Room, one of which she even convinced President Abraham Lincoln to attend as well, though there's no concrete evidence that the president was actually convinced by these seances. Mary, on the other hand, was so taken by these that she started doing her own seances, and she would even write that her son would manifest in the White House in her bedroom at night, standing by her bed and comforting her. Upon the assassination of Abraham Lincoln after the end of the Civil War, the First Lady was only driven further into the spiritualist movement, joining a spiritualist commune for several days before posing with a spirit photographer, who created a picture of her with Abraham Lincoln's hands resting on her shoulders. Perhaps it was the intensity behind Mary Todd Lincoln's obsession with spiritualism and life after death that prompted the First Lady, Grace Coolidge, to say that she had seen the ghost of Abraham Lincoln while she was in the White House, with Eleanor Roosevelt, Lady Bird Johnson, and Jackie Kennedy reportedly feeling the former president's presence as well. While the idea of seances taking place within the White House seems spooky and borderline whimsical to the morbidly curious at first glance, in digging deeper, its usage was often marred by the tragedies that drove those who partook in it to it in the first place. Thanks for watching Learn Something New. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel so that you can see more videos like this one. If you want to learn more about the White House, check out my video on the history of the building itself. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the channel Patreon, linked below in the description. Thank you so much to the patrons who continue to help make these videos possible. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.